Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I am really excited to be joined on the podcast this morning. It's a little bit of a variation of what I normally talk about, which is retail and technology and on-shelf availability. But we're here. Just a small trivia. We've got somebody who was responsible for running a nuclear submarine and carrying the actual codes for the United States. And we have somebody who used to be an incredible person in the casino business running blackjack games. How in the world are we going to tie this stuff together? That's what we're going to be here to find out. So let's start out with kind of some brief introductions. Dr. Bob, or he's sometimes called Navy Bob, and we'll probably come up with that. Why don't you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
So thank you so much, Mike. Good to be on this podcast with you and Jess. I spent 28 years in the nuclear Navy. I was a captain of the USS Texas. As you mentioned, Mike, I carried the nuclear codes for President Bush for about 3 years. And then I went after that. I joined healthcare. I was embedded in healthcare safety as the clinical executive director for patient safety and unit culture at Advent Health, the 10th largest hospital system in the country. And then I went into the business community, such as the Florida Chamber. And now I'm off starting my own consulting business. And I have a book launch coming out here June 11th. So that's a little bit about me. And I'd love to share, what I have found throughout my years, both in the Navy and in the practical world and academic world as well. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in Cincinnati, Ohio, and played blackjack at all?
Not in Cincinnati, Ohio. So no.
Then why in the world, Jessica? Jessica has the same name I do, which is probably an interesting conversation. But Jessica, why don't you go ahead and unmute and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll connect this together.
All right. Hi, my name's Jess Graen. I went to the University of Arkansas where I majored in marketing. I then moved into my MBA program at Xavier University. I moved back home to Rochester, New York, and started working as a blackjack dealer at the casino in Waterloo, New York. Yep. Within a year of the casino opening, I could deal craps, roulette, baccarat, pai gow poker, blackjack, you name it, I dealt it. So I kind of got tired of the gloominess of Rochester, New York. So I moved to Cincinnati, back to Xavier Town, and I worked here right before COVID hit. After we came back from quarantine, I moved up a little bit. I wanted to supervise table games, and I had a really, really good time supervising table games. It kind of enables you to build a better rapport with the dealers, with the guests. So I really enjoyed that. And then I kind of went, I would like to use this master's degree. So I started working in HR and learning and development at my current property. And I love it. It's awesome. I kind of found my niche, and, it's really unique to have all of this experience with guest service, with like frontline guests. And now I get to have like the back of house guest experience in that leadership role, and building relationships with team members. So it's really unique and cool, and I'm glad I got here.
Wow. There we go. There's the link. We figured it out. Okay, Sailor Bob, you went and ran nuclear submarines and worked in healthcare, and suddenly managing and working with people, leading people became an interest. And Jess, you did the same thing. Completely different career paths. They couldn't be more different, but now you're connected together. So I'm really excited to be part of this podcast and kind of talk to us a little bit about that. We're going to jump right to the chase. And the reason for the jumping right to the chase is, Dr. Bob, you have just finished a book. And the book is called Leading with Love. I mean, I have to read the exact thing. Leading from a nuclear Navy to the White House and healthcare. Tell us a little bit about this book. What was the background of the book? What's the benefit? Tell us a little bit about, you sound plenty of busy. You probably have lots of things to do rather than write books, but this was important to you. So tell us about this.
So, Mike, exactly. When I was getting underway on submarines, I rode almost every single nuclear submarine in the fleet, there's a lot of them. And it was a profound awakening for me, because within 5 minutes of being on that submarine, I could tell if that was a really great performing submarine, or it was had some serious performance issues. And the nuclear Navy is one of the most homogeneous environments. We all go through the same leadership schools. We all go through the same technical schools. We use the same procedures through the entire nuclear fleet. And yet there was such a profound difference between some submarines that were just knocking it out of the park effortlessly, and some that had some serious incidents, such as running into seamounts, colliding with fishing vessels. And I had this hunch that what it is culture and leadership. That was the only difference that I could see. And how the leaders would build these authentic relationships with their crew. And they basically led with love. I didn't realize that until I started diving into the book. But these were all practical experiences going forward. And just as I'm writing this book, and at the same time, unknown to me, I started getting my doctorate at Rollins College. So I started diving into the academic world, which I didn't have access to before. And one of the first leadership theories that I came across was this theory called leader-member exchange. And that is where your dad came up with this leadership theory. It's been around for over half a century, and meta-analysis after meta-analysis shows that if you build authentic relationships, lead with love, your outcomes will exceed far beyond expectations. And so when I realized that this was an academic way to prove my theory or hunch in the nuclear Navy, I wrote the book. And I have no doubt, I've researched multiple different leadership theories. I teach at UCF, the Masters of Healthcare Administration, both in quality, policy, and leadership. And there's no doubt that this leadership theory and the work that your dad has done is really explaining for leaders that this is the way to lead in the future. So based on that, that's where I wrote the book, to really make this world a better place with leading with love and utilizing your dad's incredible research and work for the last half century to provide tools for leaders to be able to really take this to the next level. So that was the genesis of writing this book.
So you said something pretty interesting. Within 5 minutes, obviously you have a lot of history about two Navy subs and their performance, and they're running into stuff or not running into stuff, et cetera. You say within 5 minutes, though, but that aside, you could sense whether it was an efficient run machine or not. Give us some practical things that you saw in the really, really ones that were run well versus the ones who may had some opportunity.
So I think the key to success, and again, Mike, I'm glad you asked that question. This wasn't just unique to the submarine Navy. Right. When I went into healthcare, I went on multiple different units, and it was almost exact. It was deja vu. When I would walk on one unit, it would be like, how do I sign up? How can I apply to this unit? I want to be part of this group, this family that feels like they feel cared for. And then I would walk on other units. I wouldn't let my relatives or anybody touch that unit with a 10-foot pole. And it was such a direct correlation. So what were the indications that really highlighted that culture is that when I would walk on a submarine or walk on a unit, if they wouldn't greet you or say, "Hey, how are you? What's your name?" And what it was, it's nothing about greeting. Maybe they were busy or so forth, but you could tell in 5 minutes when you started engaging with them. But what I found on the Texas was the same thing, and we'll get to that a little bit later, is that I was tasked as the commanding officer of the USS Texas, the first Virginia class, tasked to take this new Virginia class ship underneath the Arctic North Pole to certify it for Arctic operations. And I had 2 months to take this crew, it's essentially a crew that was just coming out of a shipyard, and train them and getting them underneath the North Pole. And I was really excited, but it was fraught with danger. This was the first time we've ever done it. And if you go underneath the North Pole, the temperature is 28 degrees, and it's like a rainforest of all the condensation of water in the air that will come out. And these droplets are coming on randomly, dropping on these highly energized nuclear cabinets that have microprocessors that are controlling the nuclear reactor. And there were times when we would transverse or travel underneath the ice where there was hours, even days, where we couldn't surface because the ice was so thick. And if you lose the reactor and you can't restore it, and this is a possibility of shorting out an entire cabinet, you die, right? Because you can't surface, you can't use your emergency diesel. And we also had some indications of some foreign submarines that were coming out to try to find us. And we're also passing this pass has the iceberg factory of the world. It was the same iceberg that sank the Titanic, and we were driving by this. And the only way you can detect icebergs at that degree of temperature is to go active sonar. Well, clearly that's not a recipe for success if you had foreign submarines coming out to try to find you. But I would tell you, Mike, that was not my concern. My concern was the culture of the crew. We were the worst performing ship in the Atlantic Fleet. Morale was just abysmal. We almost failed a major nuclear engineering exam before I got there. And so what I did is I concentrated on the culture of the crew based on my previous experiences. I was lucky to be trained by some great leaders who led with love. And I concentrated on the culture. Within a year and a half, we were the best submarine out of 10 in our squadron in the Pacific Fleet. We had the highest retention in the Pacific Fleet for 2 years in a row. And that engineering exam that we almost failed before I got there, we scored the highest grade possible on that exam. And it wasn't me. It wasn't my ability or my technical, my tactical. It was how I built these authentic relationships. And how it's explained, it was no doubt in my mind, is through the theory called leader-member exchange. So that is how I knew. And once I determined, and again, to answer your question, is that what I found with my crew, right? I couldn't tell, but I knew that there was a cultural issue there. And what I did through a solicitation of hearing their concerns, exactly what your dad has done. They didn't care for the submarine and the mission because they felt that the mission or the submarine didn't care for them. So they wouldn't go out of their way to interact with somebody. They felt like they were being not valued. And that is one of the key ingredients for success. So that's how I knew.
I've heard it said before that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. I've heard that before. People kind of, well, that looks really good on a poster, but that's what you're really talking about, right? If you don't care for the people that work with you and for you, you're just treating them as an object to get something done, they're going to reflect that behavior is kind of what I hear you saying. Jessica, this is a whole lot different. I don't know that people really die in casinos, but give us a little view into your world, because while it's a completely different, the whole food and entertainment, I don't honestly know much about other than through your conversations with me. But tell me about the people that are working casinos, the dealers and the back staff and all that kind of stuff. What exactly do they get compensated for? How do you motivate them to be really, really good at what they do? Is there anything about this concept of leading with love that fits into how you would motivate folks to really perform at their peak?
Absolutely. So the really unique thing about casinos is that you can come in and work a job and then also transfer to like 4 different industries without leaving the building. So there's a lot of diversity in our staff, and there's a lot of diversity in, just the industry. So the other really interesting thing is that, I love where I work, but I could go do the same thing at another casino down the road. So how do we keep those guys here versus them going and seeking other opportunities, whether it's in other states, other other companies. And I really truly believe that it's building that relationship with your team. In my experience in table games, there's been an ideology of like a churn and burn kind of thing. Like the team members feel like they're just being used and used and used and then thrown away when they're done with them. And that's just, it's not fair. And that's who wants to work in a business like that. Sometimes it's as simple as just coming around and saying, hey, good morning. It's good to see you. It seems so basic. It seems like it'd be innate. It seems like it would be just, how you carry yourself. But empathy and leading with love, it's a skill that's not honed in a lot of leaders. And so, I've found that the leadership that I work with the best are the ones that talk to me, that get to know me. They're like, hey, good morning. Hey, what'd you do this weekend? Hey, how's your dad doing? Basic things. And I don't know if it's basic to me just because I've been raised this way. And this is how, my dad carries himself with his team. I've been around LMX my entire life. So it's just, to me, it feels innate. And with my experience at the casino, it's really not. So, it's important that we meet our team members where they are. And, we want them to feel like they're human, that they're not just cogs in a wheel, that they're valued. So, that's what's really important, that they're not replaceable.
Maybe a little bit of double click on that. I'll give you another quote that I've heard a long time ago. People don't leave companies, people leave people. Right?
Absolutely.
So I am now a brand new employee and I'm running the blackjack table at your casino. How are you going to treat me to make sure that I feel like I belong there? Because paycheck is a great thing. I mean, it puts food on the table, et cetera. I think that's what gets people to work. I don't think that's what keeps people at work. So how do you treat me? Give me a couple scenarios where you treat me poorly and I leave and go somewhere else, or you treat me well and I go, I want to stay here forever. I'll do anything to work with Jessica or Jess. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Throwing out my legal name, are you? So, I was a break-in dealer in 2017. There were the cool thing about working in table games is that you can have a different supervisor every night. And then you start to know which supervisors you like to work with. You start to know which ones will have your back, so to say. With it being the ideology that the customer is always right, it's not always the case in table games. There are people that are trying to pull one over. There are people that are trying to cheat. And the supervisors I worked with the best are the ones that had my back. And they're like, no, that's not how that was supposed to go. Or no, you didn't have that bet. The ones that supported me and, made me feel like they trusted me. And there is definitely a mutual trust in that department, because if I mess up as a dealer, the supervisor is going to get in trouble too, because they were supposed to be watching me. So there's definitely like a mutual respect and understanding. And so you have to have that even level relationship and just, understand each other, get to know each other, and when I started supervising, I knew which dealers I could trust and which ones I couldn't. I knew which dealers I wanted in my section and which ones I didn't. And it was important that the ones that I didn't want in my section, I talked to them. I didn't talk to them and coach them on the table. Once they were tapped out for break, I'm like, hey, you could do this a different way. Or, hey, we should try it this way. Or, hey, the rule book says we should do it this way. And actually building those relationships, that out group, so to speak, as far as leader member exchange goes, and building those relationships with them, making them know that I trust them. I want them to be better. I want us to be better because we're a team.
I picked something else up you said too, and it's a quote that I've heard before too. Compliment in public and coach in private. You didn't coach in the middle of the table when you have customers around. You don't go, you should have done this better. No, that's not the place to have that conversation. You can compliment and tell them, boy, you're really doing a good job. Keep taking that guy's money. Ha ha ha. I mean, wow. But you coach one-on-one. You don't people in an uncomfortable position. That's really, really interesting. All right. So Dr. Bob, back to you. Navy Bob, whatever we want to call you. Since I messed up Jess's name, I'll go ahead and mess up your name as well. There are millions of books on organizational theory. Millions. They're all over the place, right? Some are theoretical, some are practical, some are somewhere in the middle. Okay. Do you think leading with love is the right leadership tool to lead people, or is it more than that? Tell us a little bit about that.
So thank you, Mike. And if I could just add on something that Jess talked about, is that this is just another example that this works in any industry.
Hmm.
And this is not something that a leader has to do something extra. It will actually make their lives so much easier, and you will lead a good life by doing it. It's a win-win-win situation. And one of the articles that was really fascinating to me as I was doing my doctoral studies is called The Great Attrition and Great Attraction by McKinsey. And they surveyed multiple thousands of employees, and from Canada to Singapore, United States, you name it, like there's 8 different countries. And the number one reason why they were leaving their companies, and some big hospital systems were paying an additional $400 million per year due to the excess cost of turnover, right? And the number one reason why they were leaving was because they didn't feel valued by far. And so when I was teaching, and another anecdote is that when I was teaching some healthcare professionals, one of them raised their, and it was everyone raised their hand, and I had to move on, and they were just story after story on how they didn't feel valued at work. And it's something simple, Jess, as you mentioned. One of the students raised their hands and says, listen, I contact customers to schedule appointments. And when we contact the customers or patients, our voice is recorded, or this conversation is recorded. And there's people that will audit to see if we do everything that we're supposed to do by the procedure, like pronounce their name twice or ask them and follow up. And she says to me, Dr. Ronska, she says, I've been working at this organization for 6 months. And the only time that my supervisor comes and talks to me is when I didn't do something right when I talk to a patient. And she says that I have never been once asked, how am I doing? Where am I from? What do I like? And I said, are you considering leaving? She says, absolutely. I have multiple resumes out there, and I don't care if I get paid a lower salary. I just don't like where I'm working. I don't feel valued. And so just like you said, Jess, that there's data out there that would really, it supports leading with love and the purpose of doing it. So why is this book different? And it goes right into that, Mike, is that it really dawned on me as a practical experience. It gives real practical stories, enjoyable stories, where I thought I was counter-detected by a foreign Navy. And what got me out of that was leading with love. One of my sailors spoke up. He felt comfortable with psychological safety and transparency to put his neck on the line for me, because we had this culture of caring. And so I talk about those stories. I talk about in the healthcare industry, I talk about the carrying the nuclear codes for President Bush. And so I'm giving these practical examples on how great leadership actually is, with some lessons going in and actually tools that you could share today to really enhance your leadership abilities to lead with love. But I also share, and again, I had to do this because sometimes you learn so many more great lessons from bad leaders than you do from good, because it really scars you. It provides this, I am never going to do that. So there's several stories in there that really talk about how toxic, apathetic leaders, and it correlates ship performance, there's no doubt, is directly correlated to leading with love or a toxic work environment. And then what put the icing on the cake, which is, wasn't my own good old boy practical stories, when I could back it up with your father's research for over a half a century that has done so much in so many industries, and he is a legend in the academic world. And if I can tell the story to help and change this world to make it a better place, that is the purpose of why this book is different. And I have no doubt that this is going to be great.
Let me play a little bit different angle. If I just read the cover, leading with love, I could interpret that as just being your people's best friend. Always say yes. And Jess, I'm going to come back to you as well. Always just be nice and say yes. Always have their back. That's not always the right thing to do. Leading with love doesn't mean having them like you better. It's not about a friendship. Define leading with love when you've got to have some tough conversation. Jess already said do it in private, which is great. But I'm assuming we're not just saying they just run around rampant and you just, oh, you did a great job even if you don't. So how do you provide really tough feedback and do that in a loving way?
So Mike, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I get asked this question a lot, right? I am not there, and love alone is not the answer. It is the foundation. And my definition of leading with love is sacrificially giving of oneself for the benefit of others. I was in command, not for my next promotion or, appeasing people above me. My main purpose was to care for that crew. And once that crew felt that they were cared for, I knew that the mission results would follow. And so leading with love is defined as a mindset where you will put others above your own needs. And once you do that, then the trust will happen, right? And it talks about this in the book. But one of the things you talked about that is so important is that caring standards. So when you lead with love and you enforce caring standards, you hold people accountable, and holding people accountable is an act of love. And first thing you have to do with the book Good to Great is, as any leader, you have to look yourself in the mirror to say, if something happened, what did I do to have this happen? Was it the training? Was it the expectations? What did I do as a leader to make this incident happen? And good leaders, what they do is something happens, they look in the mirror and they look at themselves to say, what did I do? Bad leaders, as soon as something happens, they immediately look out a window to try to blame fault. But as great leaders, once you identified, and Captain Groom's one of the greatest leaders of love that was going out. He used to always say, it's not what happens to you, is what you do to make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, once you set expectations and you clearly articulate what those expectations are, you then hold people accountable. Accountability is not this, let's be friends, let's go. It is holding people accountable for not having, accountability or performing as you want in love. And it's not over the top, but first you have to have those expectations. And one of the sailors that you hit this inflection point when you start leading with love, and why it's so hard. It's like going to the gym. You can't have it happen overnight, right? You don't build trust overnight. You don't build these standards overnight. It's this iterative process, and you have to have that mindset. But there's an inflection point that I found in the USS Texas and other areas of industries. When you hit this inflection point, people will no longer fear of making a mistake to get in trouble. They will do things and have this mindset that they don't want to make a mistake because they don't want to disappoint the family or the people that they're around. So to go back to your question, no, leading with love is the foundation, but there's much more to that. It's called trust, standards, and purpose that I talk about in the book. And when you hold someone accountable after setting expectations, that is a act of love. So that's how you get great results.
Awesome. Jessica, you are in a very different stage of your career than Navy Bob and I are, but I'm sure you've had an opportunity to experience people who have done a really, really good job of leading you, and maybe some people who have not done a good job. So let's not use names because this will be a yes. But what is some of the attributes of people that have really been really successful leading you from your perspective that you have tried to copy? And what are those attributes that people have done to you to go, I'm not going to do that because that wasn't fun? Talk to us about what does it mean for you?
Absolutely. So there's one leader I think of in particular that I absolutely loved working with. They were open with communication, with what's going on. They sought my opinion, which made me feel super valued about how we should proceed. This person was super personable, talked to me about things, would check in with me. I'm like, hey, I remembered this happened. So how are you doing? Those kinds of things, built that relationship with me. And I'm still in communication with this person, super valuable, awesome asset for me. And it's just, you build those relationships and you feel valued. You feel like this person trusts you. You feel like you can put forth your best effort because there's a mutual respect there. Versus some other leadership I've had where, instead of talking to me about literally anything besides work, they just drop things on my desk while I was in the bathroom, or, send me an email and say, hey, do this for me. Okay, but, like, hey, how you doing? Good morning. Like nothing, like just commands. Okay. All right. So, I definitely agree that you learn more from bad leaders than you do necessarily from the good ones. You learn, okay, when I'm in that position, I'm not doing that. And so, yeah, I've had some micromanagers in my time. Doesn't work for me. I'm definitely a self-starter. I'm someone who likes to educate myself on all aspects of whatever I'm in. I dive headfirst. So micromanagement is not effective for me. And it also feels like you don't trust me. It feels like you don't, trust that I'm going to do my job properly. And I'm definitely someone that will do my job properly. So yeah, I've had a little bit of both for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. And by the way, I would encourage you for those leaders who have really, really done a good job, send them this podcast. Say, by the way, I was talking about you.
I will. I for sure will.
I think it's always good to hear because sometimes the leader, they are very guarded in what they share because, but I'm leaders that I've worked for that have been very effective, especially when they give you tough feedback. If they do it in the right way, I just say, that wasn't fun to hear, but thank you. Because you did it in the right way. You didn't do it in front of a group of people. You didn't make a snide comment about it in front of everybody where they all know where it's coming from. And you let me have the discussion where I was coming from and why I did it that way. And we have a mutual understanding. We may not agree, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, you're the boss. But at least I understand where you came from, and I understand you understand and took the time to hear my point of view. And again, people don't leave companies, people leave people. And if you just feel like you're stuck reporting to somebody, and you will be for the inevitable future, that is not respectful of you as an individual employee, I don't care how much you're paying, you'll go somewhere else and find that. Because here's the reality. We spend a third of our life sleeping. We spend a third of our life with family and friends and doing hobbies. We spend a third of our life working. I don't want to spend a third of my life and be miserable. All right. I want to go figure out what I love to do and work with people that I enjoy working with. And by the way, I can put food on the table at the same time. That's a really powerful combination for sure. So Dr. Bob, back to you. So the book talks about loving people-centric approach embedded with trust, standards, and purposes. Talk to us about practically what that looks like, either in a naval carrier or healthcare. What exactly does that mean?
So just going back to what Jess said, is that, there are some leaders that, don't want to interact with other people. They're introverted. And what I found through this book is a lot of them haven't been really taught or aware of how to interact with people, some basic people skills. And so, that I know in the book, it talks about some real life practical examples that leaders could use to implement to help them if they are introverted or they don't like talking to people. And one of the stories I talk about is one of these commanding officers that I worked with. He was very introverted. When he got in front of the crew, he would come to me later and he would tell me, how did I do? Like you could tell it was not comfortable for him. But we were one of the best submarines in the fleet. And what he did, and I'll give you one example for trust, one of the components is he started this program called the Crew Top 3. Once a quarter, he would go in front of the crew and he would say, tell me your top 3 concerns. whatever it is, parking, your schedule, like ships get whatever it is, just tell me your top 3 concerns. And he would go in and he'd listen and read every single one of those. And then he would then debrief on what he's doing about it. And even though he couldn't do some things, he would then talk about a long-term plan to be able to do that. And it proved to be an incredible opportunity to build trust. And one of the greatest definitions of trust that I came across during my academic studies was trust is defined as having good intentions, which you will with leading with love. And one of the most important things that leaders can do is to follow up your words with actions. If you're a leader that will say that you're going to do something and you don't do it, that is the quickest way to break trust. But it's also the quickest way to build trust, to solicit what are the concerns of your people that work for you, and what are you as a leader, because your main purpose is to care for those people underneath you. Yep. And what barriers can you help them with? And once you do that, then that trust will be built. The same thing with caring standards and purpose that I talk about in the book. And this simple tool of one of many that's discussed in the book is the crew top 3. And when I had that culture of, I looked in the mirror and we were about to go underneath the ice, and it was like whack-a-mole. It was just like, I knew we were going to have another major incident. I just didn't know when. And I looked at myself in the mirror as the commanding officer, and I said to myself, what am I doing? This is dangerous. We're talking about losing a nuclear reactor, and I'm in charge of them. So what I did was I implemented the first thing, the crew top 3. And there was a stack of issues that I had no idea as the commanding officer, that I was there for approximately a month. And I was in awe. I was shocked. I had no idea. And at the end of doing this consistently for every month of hearing it out, after my time, after 3 years, do you know what the number one concern was? There was only one after this. The number one concern was there wasn't a sufficient variety of hot sauces on the mess deck or cafeteria. I knew at that point.
Good.
And that's one of the stories we could talk about. So I talk about love alone is not the only thing, but it is the essential foundational ingredient. And it's trust, standards, and purpose of, I've looked at all the other constructs, empathy, communication skills, you name it. Those will all come together. But the most important thing to build that relationship, and your dad touches on this through his meta-analysis, through my research, you can do things to improve your communication skills as a leader, or your ability to look better, work out, whatever. And you could do the same thing as a subordinate, your follower, right? But what they found in research, the most profound impact and exponential increase to success is developing that authentic relationship. So if you want to improve your leadership, if you want the biggest bang for the buck, don't concentrate on yourself. It's important, don't get me wrong. But if you really want to see profound differences, you concentrate on the authentic relationships of those that you work with. And the results, it's out there. It's over 6 decades. It's out there. It's proven through statistical analysis that your outcomes will go up and you will be seen as a greater leader. And the last thing I will tell you, that why I chose trust, there was an HBR article in 2017, and they analyzed the differences. It's called the neuroscience of trust. They looked at a high trust environment, which you would get with leading with love, and a low trust environment. And what they found was the outcomes were off the chart. That a high trust environment led to 106% more energy at work, 13% less absenteeism, 40% less burnout, 74% less stress. And this is why these people are leaders, to care for their people. And they don't understand is that if they put their people first, productivity will follow. But once you put productivity first, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yep. Yep. So if I'm a skeptic out there listening to this, I'm responsible for a P&L of a casino, a business, or whatever. I deal with hard measurement facts, sales versus goals, profit, turnover, etc. Love is just really squishy. I can't measure that. But this is a toss up to both of you. There are ways to measure this whole LMX theory, right? It doesn't have to be just a concept. You can actually measure and go in and measure the LMX factor of an organization, train them, and then measure the post. There is ways to do that. Is that not correct?
So I'll let Jess go first, but I
Sure.
definitely have an answer for it.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it, turnover. We talked about you leave leaders, not jobs necessarily. You can go get the same job down the road. But that leader, if that leader makes you passionate about what you do, makes you feel valued, makes you feel like you are important, then you're not going to leave that leader. You also can look at employee engagement surveys, which we do one here annually at my company. And then we do a pulse survey for the departments that are lacking a couple of months later. And, you look at those numbers, and I can look at the employee engagement survey and go, okay, I know that person's a good leader. I know that person's a good leader. And those are definitely the departments that do the best on the engagement survey. When you feel like your leader values you, you buy in more to the company, you buy in more to the job, you're bought in more to the success of the company, as well as the success of your team. So I would say turnover and employee engagement for sure are measures.
So if I've got 50 people in my organization, I think one of the things that I get is only 5 of them responded. That tells you something right there, possibly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're also saying if there's a high percentage that respond, you can get feedback about the leader's effectiveness in terms of leading with love or LMX or whatever you want to call it, just based upon the responses that they provide, right?
Absolutely. And people
give us an example of one of those. Here's a key message, and I don't share specific numbers here, but here's a key question that I look at to see how effective that leader is with his team.
For sure. There's a question on our engagement survey every year that says, I feel respected in my workplace.
Ooh.
That's it. To me, that is it right there. That will tell me whether they have a good leader or not. Because if you don't feel respected, there's something wrong, and we need to figure out what's going on. And that's when we have focus groups, and we work with our business partners to try and figure out what's going on, because something is integrally wrong in this department.
Wow.
Yeah.
Respect. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a pretty important word. Dr. Bob, how about you? Can you measure love?
Absolutely. And I'll give you one anecdote of why this is so important. And I was in one company, and they have this measurement for leadership engagement. And it's essentially 3 questions. How much recognition do you get? How much time or frequency does your leader interact with you? And one of the most profound questions is the Net Promoter Score. Would you recommend this leader to someone else?
Interesting. And
this company would look at those scores, and there was overwhelming evidence of a direct correlation to turnover to higher engagement scores, basically leading with love. And we're not talking, outliers 1 or 2. We're talking millions of dollars that if you could train people how to lead with love. And so you're right. Anything in the academic world, you need to measure it. You need to define it. And so through my research, the definition that I mentioned earlier is sacrificially giving of oneself for the benefit of others. Just like a great example, if a mother is next to a river with their child and the child accidentally falls into the river, what does the mother do? The mother, even if she can't swim, will jump in after the child and potentially risk her own life to save her child. So did she sacrificially give herself for herself for the benefit of the child? Absolutely. And so that is a great definition to me of love. And so you can see it in all the different religions. It's out there talking about love. And for some reason, we're very sensitive in the business community to talk about this. But I think it's time. This generation, they want to feel valued. They want to feel cared for. And one of the profound why I'm so interested in leader member exchange, it's a measurement. You can measure this. Your dad has done this. And one of the questions of the scales, validated scales that's been around, like I said, a long time, is would you have the back of your follower at the cost of your own? That is the definition of love in the business world. And you can measure this. And there's overwhelming evidence that if you can improve these relationships, outcomes, I don't care. And I did this with my dissertation, retention, burnout, error rates, everything will go up. Is all you have to do as a leader, train these leaders the importance of this, that it's just not, the reason why this is so hard, Mike, and there's no doubt, is that, we have a ratcheting effect. So if you meet a certain budget one quarter, well, that's the new standard. And then these leaders do everything they possibly can to meet that bar again at whatever cost, right? There's not this long trend of let's see how we can build this over time. And so if you get a new leader in there for their own survival, they will do whatever it takes to be able to meet that metric or that goal. And they're not leading with love. And it is just a compounding spiral effect. And you have these CEOs of some of these companies, they need to look at themselves in the mirror and see what pressures they are doing for productivity to force these young leaders to not lead a good life and be this type of leader that is really affecting so many, mentally and physically going forward. So that I think is, that word has to come out.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We are right at about time. Believe it or not, we've been talking for about 50 minutes already. Just any closing thoughts, any question, anything topics that were on your mind that we haven't talked about? The floor is yours to close up.
Sure. I think it's important. We talk about leading with love. We talk about building relationships. It's important that we break down those transactional relationships that kind of tend to be what happens with that churn and burn I talked about earlier. We'll just get somebody else to replace you. And it's difficult to lead a team that, doesn't necessarily respect you, that doesn't necessarily want to respect you. So I think it's important that, especially here at my property, there's a lot of green leaders that we get them to understand that, once you build those relationships and lead with love and, get to know your team, make them want to come to work, it builds that engagement, it builds passion, it builds buy-in. And, you are going to get extraordinary results if you have a team that respects you, respects the business, and is passionate and bought into what you want from them.
That's about the third time you've used the word respect. I love that. I love that because it's exactly right. I'll go to battle for anybody who I believe has my back and respects me, even if we don't agree on everything. But if I don't know that you got my back and I don't trust that you have my best interest at heart and I don't respect you, I'm going to have a tough time, jumping on a grenade for you. Not to make this a war analogy. Doctor, how about yourself?
So in closing, I love this gentleman called Mr. Rogers, My Neighborhood. So I always inspired by people that have really shown leading with love and the profound impacts that it can have. So we all know Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers has this quote. The quote is love and success, always in that order. It's that simple and that difficult. So what he means by that is that you as a leader, it is so important to put love first and then success. And it has to be in that order. And, we are put on this earth for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to serve others. And when we find that service to others, the wholeness, the fulfillment that we will feel will be undeniable. And so we come into this world with nothing and we will leave with nothing. But our impacts and how we take care of people is why we're on this earth. And so as leaders, we have to understand that we're not here for the sole purpose of how much money that we're going to make, how fancy of a car we're going to drive, or how big of a house we're going to live in. Those will all come after we lead with love. The success will be out there, but our mindset has to understand that it is your people, not treating them like objects. You treat them as if they were people, will be your quickest road to success of fortune, fame, and leading a good life.
Incredible. Incredible. You know, one of my favorite quotes is the problem with reward systems is they work, and what's rewarded is repeated. You know, it'd be very interesting to look at most of the top 500 companies, to look at their P&L to see anything that relates to how effective and how respective their leaders are. And that's a fact. Turnover is typically just when I have a problem with high turnover, I start digging in and figuring it out. But why is not, you know, the effectiveness of the leadership and how you are respected? I know people get really kind of heebie-jeebie about the word love. I think it's a very appropriate word, even in a business context. But even if it's the word respect and integrity and promises made and promises kept, et cetera, we don't measure that in a P&L. And maybe we probably should, because I've seen that time and time again, where you really have got a bunch of people who are going through the motions, but they don't respect the leader. They don't think the leader has their back. That bad things happen. People look for other ways to get that fulfillment. So, guys, I can't thank you enough for this topic. I think it's something that's absolutely needed in today's industry. It's fascinating that you both come out with a different time period in your careers, but B, completely different industries. But it all ties together. So, thank you guys so much for your time. We've got the actual book itself is coming out pretty quick. So we've got plenty of marketing that the audience has seen throughout there, but please buy this book, take advantage of it, learn from it. And we would love to be part of anything that we can do to help you guys learn how to lead with love. So Dr. Bob, Jess, thank you so much. I appreciate you doing it, and have a great rest of your day.